Good morning. Happy Friday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. Okay. So I'm going to try to do a twofer for the Q&A this morning. I think we got enough time and I think the questions are appropriate for that. So let's go ahead and we will dive right in. First question comes from Domen, and Domen says, if someone has an inhalation bias and has compression at the iliosacral area, how would this limit hip external rotation? So this is a really good question and a really common one. And I think we've answered it to a certain degree before, but we'll throw a couple of other details in here that might be helpful and useful. So we'll grab the pelvis here. So if I have an inhalation bias, I'm typically going to have my counternutated sacrum and I'm going to have an ER ilium. So that would typically be your narrow ISA, IPA people that don't have full breathing excursion. Under those circumstances, then what we would expect to see is we'll see a change in the position of the acetabulum, such that if it's biased towards inhalation, it's going to be more retroverted. We're going to have a nice little twist here at the ischium that's going to bias us towards external rotation. So again, that brings up a really good question. It's like, well, okay, so if I'm biased towards external rotation because of my inhalation bias, then how do I lose the ER? That would be associated with the compressive strategies that we see in this upper posterior region on the pelvis. So this musculature changes its direction of pull based on the orientation of the pelvis. And so anything above the trochanter, as the hip orients forward. So if I get a compressive strategy posteriorly here and I get a push from behind, that's going to increase the anterior orientation. That's where you're going to start to lose your external rotation, because all the musculature above the trochanter reorients its direction of pull from external rotation to internal rotation. So the more anterior orientation that I have, the more ER that I'm going to lose. And so if we would go forward symmetrically in this situation, I would lose external rotation on both sides. If I have a lead with the left side, then I'm going to see a greater loss of ER on the left side. If I'm tilting on an oblique axis over to the right, then this side's going to lead a little bit, and so that's going to show a decrease in external rotation to a greater degree on the right side. Now, a cool little thing that we can do is we can also confirm this from the ground up in some situations. So if I have this left side leading and I see this reduction in external rotation greater than it is on the right, typically what I'm going to see in this side foot, on the same side foot, which would be the left side, is I will see a mid-propulsive kind of a foot, which would be typically described as a closed chain pronation of the foot. And so that kind of goes together. So that'll give you a little clue. In many situations, not in all situations, but in many situations, you're going to see those two things go together. When I get this tip over to the other side, what you're going to see is you're going to see a late propulsive foot under those circumstances. And so I'm going to see what would be considered an open chain pronation, where I'm actually pushing through that medial aspect of the right foot when the right hip is a little bit more forward based on the oblique tilt of the pelvis to the right. So hopefully, Domen, that gives you a little bit of information as to how you actually lose that ER, and then a couple of signs that actually might be helpful to kind of confirm your suspicions. Okay, next question comes from Josh, and I'm going to paraphrase Josh's question a little bit because some of it was directed towards a couple of things about his own representation, but he brings up a really good point that I wanted to make. So Josh mentions when in situations where you're doing a lot of side planks, suitcase carries, Camporini deadlifts, heels elevated squats, and lateral split squats or side split squats for people with wide infrasternal angles. The question is adding load to these activities beneficial, or is it counterproductive? And so here's the answer to that. It's a big fat maybe, because it depends on what your intention is. But under most circumstances, when you're trying to capture a position, so we're trying to reacquire relative motion between segments, if I increase the load to a significant degree, what I end up doing is recruiting a great deal of superficial musculature, which increases my compressive strategy. It may drive me towards breath holding. And so those strategies constrain segments together. Now, that's not always a bad thing, because I can also create an emphasis in certain cases. So let's just pick on the Camporini deadlift for a second, where if I increase the load on a Camporini deadlift, I will actually increase the constraints at the ankle, the foot, and the knee, but I may be able to access a little bit more hip motion under those circumstances. And if that's my goal, then adding load under those circumstances may actually help me to be successful. However, if I'm trying to recapture relative motions at the ankle and the knee to a certain degree, then again, promoting the superficial musculature, promoting a breath hold, and creating a propulsive strategy may actually be detrimental for me to recapture that relative motion. So you can't say yes and you can't say no, but like if we had to throw in like a general recommendation, it's like increasing load when you're trying to recapture relative positions is usually not the best case scenario. So let me give you another example. So if we were doing, say, a cable chop versus a cable lift, so one of the distinguishing characteristics between the two is that a cable chop actually reduces the gravitational load on the human being, because the resistance is pulling me upward. So as I pull down, even though I'm creating a compressive strategy to pull the weight down anteriorly on the backside, I actually have the capacity to expand. Whereas if I was doing a cable lift and I'm lifting upward, that's more of a propulsive strategy, which is going to create a lot of superficial musculature. And again, it promotes the overcoming breath holding type strategies that actually may reduce my relative motions. So again, Josh, I think this is a really, really great question that when in doubt, the answer is determine what your needs are through a test. You intervene, and then you retest to see if you're actually accomplishing what you intended to accomplish. But as a general rule, the greater the load, the greater the compressive strategy, the greater the breath hold, etc., you're going to actually reduce and constrain segments. And if that's your goal, to produce more force, then more power to you. If you're trying to recapture ranges of motion, then your ability to breathe through an activity will allow you to capture those relative motions that tend to restore ranges of motion, comfort, etc. So everybody have a great Friday. Hang in there, and I will see you guys next week.